And the Acts of the Apostles is a bunch of stories about what happened after Jesus went back to heaven in what we call the Ascension, and what the apostles did to continue his work. And in this particular story, it's about all the apostles, but it kind of focuses on St. Peter. And remember how Peter was, well, when Jesus got arrested, everybody scattered, and Peter was around, but then he denied that he knew Jesus. Then they were afraid, and they went into this upper room, and they hid away. But all of a sudden, the Spirit came upon Peter. And he went out and talked about Jesus to everybody out in public. He wasn't afraid anymore. And he healed a lot of people. In fact, it says on a nice sunny day, if your shadow went over anybody who was ill, the person was cured. So here's the story.
Many signs and wonders were done among the people through the apostles, and they were all together in Solomon's portico. None of the rest dared to join them, but the people held them in high esteem. Yet more than ever, believers were added to the Lord, great numbers of both men and women, so that they even carried out the sick into the streets and laid them on cots and mats, in order that Peter's shadow might fall on some of them as he came by. A great number of people would also gather from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing the sick and those tormented by unclean spirits, and they were all cured. The word of the Lord.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. And Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the marks of the nails, and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Do not doubt, but believe." And Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet have come to believe." But Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. The Gospel of the Lord.
Jesus is alive. That's what we celebrated last week. Jesus is alive. Now, the apostles had a little trouble believing last week when the ladies went to the tomb and found it empty. And then we heard Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and she found it empty, but she saw Jesus. And all these people, these ladies came back and told the apostles, but did they believe? Apparently they didn't believe women. Have times changed? Anyhow, it's sad, but they didn't believe until Jesus showed up and they saw him. They saw him in the flesh, and then they believed. They said, "Wow, we have seen, we believe." Not because they told us, but because we have seen. Thomas was just like the rest of them. He didn't believe until he saw. And finally, Jesus came when Thomas was around, and Thomas says, "Well, okay, wow, I believe." Jesus is alive now, here in Evansville, Indiana, in 2016. He is alive in you. He's alive in us. But people won't believe until they see him in action. They have to see Jesus works through us. Then they might say, "Oh, maybe he is alive. Maybe he is in our midst." That's what they have to see. Now, we have something to show Jesus called the corporal works of mercy. You remember those? We probably studied those back in grade school. The corporal works of mercy. One of the corporal works of mercy is that we shelter the homeless. Now you might see, how do I do that? I can work in a homeless shelter. I can do something, I can give money to a homeless shelter. Probably you don't have anybody knocking on your door saying, "Can I stay here tonight because I'm homeless?" We have a unique opportunity here in Evansville, Indiana this month to do something to shelter the homeless. There's an action down at the center on April 25, Monday evening, where we will ask the city to do something about homelessness in our city. Because we belong to an organization called CAGE, Congregations Acting for Justice and Empowerment. And we will make this request and expect them to say yes, to do something positive and creative to help the homeless. April 25, mark it on your calendar, okay? Because it's your one opportunity to do something to shelter the homeless. And we happen to have somebody here this morning. I just happen to see her here. Brenda. Brenda has, you want the microphone? Okay. We were debating on whether she was going to do this or that. Brenda is part of the committee that's been working on this particular project for CAGE about sheltering the homeless. So tell us all about it. Hold that close to you, okay?
I'm Brenda Meyer, and I'm working with the CAGE group that is doing research for housing. Actually, I've worked at the Mental Health Center for over 42 years, and you would think I would be working on the group for mental health. It's an important thing, but I tell you, the heartbreak that happens to me almost every day is what I see when I have people that have inadequate housing. I see lots of people without housing. In fact, Friday, I sat just for an hour with a woman who was just lost because she didn't really know where to go. I work for Southwestern Behavioral Health Care. You would think I would be working with the Committee for Mental Health, but actually my heartache is the people I see every day who have difficulties with their housing. Many of them are housed, they just barely can hang on to it. They may be a person who has 13 people living in the house because everybody's doubled up. Maybe somebody who's taken back somebody in their family because they've lost their apartment. Maybe somebody else who can't leave a bad situation. I want to tell you about my neighbor. Her name is Pam. Pam's 57. Her husband was disabled and ended up in the nursing home for about 18 months. She has worked her entire life, but she's only worked at jobs that have paid a pittance. Pam is diabetic. Her husband died about 6 months ago. Her husband's family has kind of been supporting her to live where she's been at. About a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, she fell in her bathtub. Her employer, her supervisor, came the next day because she had failed to show up for work 2 days in a row. She had been in the bathtub. She was experiencing kidney failure. She was also had some terrible ulcers that had resulted. She was able to recover, spent some time in the nursing home she actually worked at it, cleaned at, and went home. Unfortunately, her relatives couldn't keep supporting her. She got home. The next week later, she was put out on the street. She is now in a homeless shelter today. Tomorrow, she will go to work. She cannot support herself at a living wage to be able to provide housing. A woman has lost her spouse, lost her house, and also almost lost her life, and is going to go to work tomorrow. It's for those individuals that I really would like to see each and every one of you show up at the Cage Action. Our committee's been very busy this year. What we were able to do is at the last action was able to get the City Council to write code that actually makes our Affordable Housing Committee have to meet at least 6 times a year. Because of that, our committee has actually begun to meet, and our Cage Committee has attended some of those meetings. We have asked those individuals to go with us, as well as the Department of Metropolitan Development, some other community providers, to go down with us to Nashville, Tennessee, to see how their affordable housing group operates. In the last couple of years, they've been able to create 44 houses and more are on the way through their Affordable Housing Trust Fund. What we found out when we got down to Nashville is that Evansville has a better setup legally than they did. They've had to overcome all kinds of barriers that Evansville doesn't have. Our only barrier has been a lack of funding. We've had an Affordable Housing Trust Fund since Casino Astar first donated about 10 years ago. Unfortunately, there's not been a sustainable source of income to go into that, and as a result, it has been essentially abandoned or fallow during those years. And what we are asking the city to do this year is either for the head, Kelly Coors, of the Metropolitan Development Division to present to City Council, or for the mayor to allocate 5% of the Tropicana monies that are given each year for affordable housing. That's kind of a drop in the bucket, but it at least is a beginning sustainable source. And so for all the people that I see every day that have housing issues, for all the people I suspect each one of you knows. In fact, at one point I was going to say, okay, who in here knows of somebody who is taking in a family member so they can stay and have a place to stay? Who has paid somebody else's rent? And I would suspect that many folks in here would know of somebody who has done that. So for those people and for Pam, I'd like to see you all at the action. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. All right. Sometimes we think it's just people who are just lazy and don't want to work and who are homeless. But I know a lady who belongs to this parish, who works 3 jobs, has a couple of kids. I believe she has a master's degree, but for a long time could not find affordable housing. And it's just now at a point where it's not great, but it's satisfactory. So, and somebody reminded me last night that this could happen to anybody, any one of us. Any good disaster could knock us off our feet and maybe make us homeless. So we need to do something about this.